Welcome to the Not Badger for the week ending January 14th, 2017. Here, thanks to our slave pool of men, also known as would-be rapists in waiting, we have compiled a collection of funny, interesting, and hopefully useful clips from our most watched shows. Enjoy the spoils of their hard work. In Polecat Cast number 95, we talk about the news of the week, including stranger rape, KSU student rights, and philosophy so white. The Women's March on Washington will send a bold message to our new administration on their first day in office and to the world that women's rights are human rights, and also the male symbol. We stand together, recognizing that... What?
Hold on. Okay, so women's rights are human rights.
Yeah.
Okay, so why, if this is the case, if they're supposing that this is that's their thing, why is it a problem when men want the same kind of rights?
Because men already have all the rights, I believe, is the normal
Yes.
answer that you're supposed to give. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just need
idea that they
clarification
need something is
because,
just ludicrous.
I thought men's rights was it was about human rights also. That's what I thought, but I guess
Well,
I guess
first
not.
you have to consider men to be human, and then you have to consider them to be worthy of rights. And yeah, we're not there yet, but but they also have all the rights.
One day, maybe.
And they're also not human. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, this is so weird. It's some contradictory things I'm seeing.
Yeah,
so
maybe
odd.
women are human plus, and men are just human.
They're double plus human.
They're double plus human. When you pose the question, what does that mean for other rapists, or what are the essentially there are things that are not said. What do those mean? Well, if you are going to take it in the most negative direction you can, then you're doing the thing that I'm warning against, which is essentially telling us what this man was thinking when you can't know. And the fact is, and this relates to something else, they are commenting on, they asked him about a 62% uptick in rape cases, not rape convictions. So that means that doesn't necessarily mean that all of those rapes are, that none of those are either, regret sex, like where they both got drunk, had sex, or one of them was drunk, or one of them was more drunk than she wanted, or whatever, or a false rape allegation, or something else. Because these things do happen, and they happen a lot. And when you broaden the definition of rape to the point where it gets really muddy when you're trying to figure out if something, because what you got to do is you got to prove intent to do that, and you got to prove that one party wanted it and the other party did not want it, and you have to prove all this stuff that's not easy to do, and it gets really muddy when they know each other, and let's say they've even been together, or they're married, or that they've been in relationships in the past, or it was a one-night stand and he was cheating on his wife, or she was cheating on her husband, or or whatever. Well, then that makes it extremely difficult to prove, and that's why these cases can go on for a while. But when it comes to stranger rape, those are relatively cut and dry, because that it was it was somebody that they didn't know, kidnapped them or did something in an alley or whatever. And so that's pretty obvious as to what it is. So there's the stuff that and there's the stuff that's a little bit, it's not necessarily in a gray area in terms of how legal it is, but it's definitely in a gray area in terms of how provable it is. And that makes it harder, right?
May I?
Yes.
Look, there's no sort of standardized pattern as to which date on which one is supposed to have sex. Some people say first, some people say third, some people say second. But if you rape before the first date, then you're a special kind of criminal. You have no standards at all. That's just not cricket.
I'm going to get into a little bit of human nature. One of the things I notice about a lot of people is, I think most people, they don't like the idea that there could be something, an equation or part of an idea that's just missing. And they just don't know the answer. Like there could be a question that does not have an answer, or it doesn't have an answer yet, and it's like a work in progress. And what I mean, this is like how you get things like, these, or organized religions, where basically everyone says, well, whatever we don't know the answer to, we're going to put God there. Or with feminism, whatever we don't know the answer to, we're just going to put patriarchy in there. Or whatever it is. and part of that is because human beings, we can't have peace of mind unless we know everything has been accounted for and we understand the world in a complete way. And I think that it's challenging for most people to be able to say, I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm not going to try to pretend that I know it. I'm not going to try to fill it with something as a placeholder until we figure something else out. I'm okay with leaving that blank. The fact that we don't actually fully understand the universe and all of psychology and all of human nature and all of evolution and everything else, I'm okay with that myself. So, and I relate that to this particular situation. When a cop says something, and he appears to put his foot in his mouth, or at least he makes an incomplete statement, or he didn't predicate his statement with every possible caveat so that nobody could hold him accountable for something, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with them not getting all the answers. I can just leave it, let it lie. And if it comes back and bites him later, then it does. Students can get a lawyer, or hire a lawyer when they're facing campus court cases. That's really going to help a lot of the men. It'll protect them from rape allegations. So that's good. Or at least the ones that, again, what I mean by that is it'll protect men who are innocent from the school. I mean, like, obviously, when you introduce due process, you're doing that at the risk of guilty people perhaps getting off if they have a good enough lawyer and a good enough alibi and all that. But it all comes down to, when it comes to the legal system, it all comes down to balancing your risks. Like, is it worth risking a few people that are guilty getting off free, so that we can have a system that protects people who are truly innocent from the system? Yeah. It's basically a risk versus security balance. So,
right, and the problem with the schools too is that from the cases that I've actually looked at, it's basically been a he said she said thing, except for the fact that the part that he said doesn't really matter. If the accusation is made, it's almost always going to result in the male student's expulsion. And to me, that is just fucking insane. It's crazy because, okay, well, we're not going to go to court about this. We're not going to look at evidence. She just said this thing happened, so it happened.
I thought political correctness was the idea that when you speak, you have to use words that don't offend people. You have to basically be mindful of who you're talking to and talking about. But this isn't about people speaking. This is actually about education. They're literally wanting to change the system of education as it exists.
You know what this reminds me of? Excuse me. God, I'm just having a fucking time of it tonight. Remember back in 2001, we had this weird little thing where the two towers got knocked down by some gents in a
Wait, did that happen?
Right?
When did that happen?
That happened. No, that happened.
Oh.
But
the Hobbit's real as well, Scott.
Right. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. It's after that happened, there was this call to remove the two towers from movies and television and all these other things, to pretend like it didn't exist because it was so painful. And I never understood that. I never understood why dealing with the reality of our world is so problematic to some people. I get it, it's a painful incident, but we don't have to pretend that it never existed. And when I see stuff like this, I feel that these kind of things that are happening now, that was a precursor. What happened with these people trying to, erase the image and the thought of 9/11 or whatever. I feel like that's where we're at now. We're at the point where those people have this is their new thing. It's oh my God, we gotta erase these things that we don't agree with or that we have a problem with. Okay, it's I get it. Maybe some of these philosophers, whoever they were, maybe they said some objectionable shit. But
that doesn't necessarily make them. But that doesn't necessarily make them completely discreditable.
Right.
Like Nietzsche. He had some some of his ideas. They didn't but
or it's another example is people want to point to Wagner. Wagner was a nationalist. He he wrote music for Hitler, for the Nazi Party, whatever. And they're like, oh no, you can't listen to Wagner anymore. And so it's this kind of thinking where it's like you devalue everything else that somebody has done because you have one little nitpick. And then in this instance, it's about skin color. And to me, this is like, I'm just kind of boggled by this. It's like the value that these people have given to our society in a larger context is not, they didn't do it just to empower whites. They did it to empower thought among men, among mankind, humankind. And this sort of thing is just boggling to me because it is very blatantly racist on the part of these people that are trying to push this through. This is fucking ridiculous. What do they mean, types of masculinity? Could somebody explain that to me? I mean, because I guess part of my problem with a lot of the stuff that they say in this article is that I feel like I've grown up a fairly well-rounded person. You know, I grew up in a family that was there were mostly women in the family. There were men there too, but it was pretty heavily in favor of women. And so I guess I was privy to the kind of things that they were going through when I was growing up. And there was never this idea that masculinity was a bad thing because, you know, my grandfather was a very kind of old school kind of dude. And he was like, you know, he's a carpenter and he did all this kind of stuff. And and there was never this idea of this toxic nature. It was just, you know, it was just being a human. Yeah. So when I see stuff like this, I'm kind of lost because I feel like people that signed up for this, I have to imagine that they just had a really fucked up upbringing to some degree, that they just didn't have any positive male role models.
Fathers.
Yeah. No, I mean, you know, I talked about this in our chat, you know, last night or the day before, or whenever. And I think because I'm boggled by some of the things I see, and I feel so separated from it because I feel like I said, I feel like I was raised a very well-rounded person in that regard, where these things don't make sense to me, like the idea of toxic masculinity and all this other shit. I'm just like, what are you on about with this? This is nonsense. So yeah, I have to think that some of these people didn't have the benefit of having fathers or things like that. They didn't have any kind of positive male role models that taught them how to do things and how to be self-sufficient or, you know, whatever it is. Yeah. So this is just crazy to me.
Having experienced 3 days worth of festival of stuff that sounds a bit like this, I think I can explain what they mean by types of masculinity. They'll probably sit you down with some chairs and say, someone give me some examples of a type of masculinity. And maybe someone will say, strong, macho, and then they'll hit him on the knuckles with a ruler and say, no, there are other types of masculinity. That is not the only type of masculinity. Sensitive, cries a lot. Good. Have a coffee.
I can't determine whether or not this is intentional, but I do believe that there is an ideological root to it, and that is the belief that things that are feminine are inherently better than things that are masculine. And when they look at what's, you know, masculine aspects, they're only ever looking at the negative stuff. Like you were saying, the macho, the tough guy, being, stoic and putting up with shit and like keeping your feelings down. And even the stuff that is actually useful, like being stoic, is useful. In fact, I believe it was either Socrates, Aristotle, or Plato that often talked about stoicism as a virtue that anybody should pursue, but it was specifically focused on men because it was good for them to be that way. And that's not the same as, like, you know, trying to shove all your feelings into a jar that it doesn't fit into only to burst later on. It's all about control, and that is not a masculine behavior per se. It's just a mature one. But these are the things that they take something that is actually useful and something that has served us well for a long time because, you know, to quote Camille Paglia, if it was up to the feminists, we'd still be living in grass huts, but we have bridges and electricity and plumbing and all that, mostly, you know, if not entirely due to men. I would say mostly, at least. And this is because of the positive aspects of masculinity. And the only thing I can think when I see this is this kind of stuff, which keeps coming up, and I see it over and over, and I think that it's basically exponentially growing, like in college and media and everything. I think they're reaping they're reaping what came out of taking fathers out of the family. You take fathers out of the family through like the court systems and through the constant messaging to women to say you don't need them. Single mothers are deified. They are worshipped despite the fact that, you know, they are a burden on the state. They are a burden to their children. And these are potentially very bad choices. I mean, again, I'm speaking in aggregate, so, you know, there's no need to point out the not alls, but this is really the effect. And then you take fathers out of the home, or you end up mothering children who to men that are not deserving as fathers, like they're not at that place where they can be fathers, and then they run off, and you know, you have deadbeat dads and all that, and then you have like people living in households, children growing up in households where there are no fathers around at all. The mom is married to the state, and she is this is like it inevitably leads to problems for boys and girls, inevitably. And on average, this is like statistically the numbers bear it out. Boys are most likely to become criminal. Girls are most likely to become teenage mothers as a result of this. And now we see all this like boy criminal behavior that happens because, you know, they've been beaten and they didn't have a father and they didn't know who to look up to and they don't know so instead they go to their peers for all their info, and then we end up in a situation where the same ideology that put us in this position is now saying, wow, look at all these destructive men. There must be something wrong with their nature. There must be something wrong with them as men, and now we have to fix it. And we have to fix it by basically bringing in more state shit, like colleges have to educate them, and we need to get funded by, you know, the government so that we can make programs, and we can do make documentaries and you know, make videos on the internet that try to tell men that they don't have to be violent and they have a choice and all this other shit. But ultimately, they don't really care. I'm not even sure that they're paying lip service, or they just want to change men on a level that men can't really, you know, fully embrace, and also a level that women won't like either. Because if you turn men's male sensibilities and masculinity towards femininity, then inevitably what you're going to get is women that are not happy with these men because they like men. So, you know, this is like the level of destruction and fallout that comes out of this kind of social engineering and you know, bullshit education. It's staggering how much damage it's going to do. So I don't.
This is the biggest lie that the whole progressive movement tells, that they believe in equality, when their approach to fixing women's problems is changing laws and changing the state and changing men, and their approach to men's problems is just changing men. Mm-hmm. How in anyone's book is that egalitarian? It's not. It's feminist.
This whole toxic masculinity conversation it's a bad solution to a problem that is very easy to solve. You could even do it in one generation if you acknowledge that these are male problems and that men themselves do not need to be retooled or changed in order to fix it. But what we do need to do is acknowledge the importance of fathers. And yeah, mothers too. But the fact is that mothers usually get to raise their kids. So that's, you know, there's no point in arguing for that. In this next clip, we discuss Puritanism's shameful secret with our very special guest, the Blue Buck himself, Teal Deer.
Disgust is sort of really quite an interesting reaction in people, actually. It comes about sort of as a means of avoiding diseases and pathogens. So in the regards to food things, kosher, halal, whatnot like that, that was as a means of avoiding basically getting sick and eating things that would be bad for you. It just sort of came up with a reason as to why. Because when you're in a situation where you don't understand what microbes are, you don't understand what bacteria is, you just have to come up with something else. In other interesting things about food and culture and whatnot is you notice in hotter areas, which are more likely to have pathogen spread, you'll notice people use more spices in cooking and in storing food because, again, that actually lowers the level of pathogen in your food. So this is sort of where this biology then meets culture in that regard. So as we move on, we develop things like cooking abilities, we develop storage abilities. So these sorts of things then become unnecessary. They came from the basal biological necessity, but then they've just sort of moved into something that is purely cultural from there. Now, at that point, then you're not, as I said, you're not then making your own decision about that. You're just taking information from someone else and just sort of saying, well, I'm just doing this because, well, someone told me to, basically.
Yeah, that's where my proposal came in. What disgust is the function there is to actually, because when we encounter things that are contradictory with our knowledge of ourselves, and we want to see ourselves as being free and autonomous, we'll often tell ourselves stories as to why we're doing something that maintains our sense of ourselves as being free and autonomous while actually complying with authority. And that's where I was saying that the disgust comes in. The mechanism is, the authority says you can't think that, you can't touch that, you can't do that. And instead of just, dealing with and if it's inconsistent with your own self-concept as being free, then you invent a story as to why you're not doing it. And my proposal is that disgust plays a large role in that story. So we instead of constantly maintaining this idea of subservience and lack of autonomy to authority, we invent a reason why we personally chose not to do that thing. And
so in essence, you try to basically give yourself autonomy in something that wasn't ultimately sort of your personal choice. You post hoc rationalize it.
You post hoc rationalize why you are complying with authority. And specific, often it's a situation where you have a desire and the authority does not approve of that particular desire. So what you do instead is you sort of problematize that desire. You say, well, whatever I was desiring, I don't really desire it because it's actually disgusting.
The law of contagion is really simple. It's basically just contact with anything that is disgusting makes you disgusting.
Yeah, okay.
That's all it is. It's a very well-known phenomenon in humans and actually quite a lot of other animals as well. It's just that touching something that would generally be pathogenic or in some cases morally disgusting, because the two are actually very, very closely linked in the human brain. They actually activate the same parts of the brain if you MRI people who are feeling disgust. And so because of that, people will then just stay away from it because they don't want to become contaminated. But this is then where the social compliance comes in, because you might not think that the thing that you're doing is disgusting, but you know that other people will think that it is. So if they found out that you were doing it, then that would then lower your social standing in their eyes. So in that instance, that's not then your disgust reaction to it, that's then your sense of social shame and social ostracism. Physical disgust and moral disgust, they are, for all intents and purposes, biologically completely identical to each other. As I've said, they cause the same areas of your brain, specifically the insular cortex, to actually sort of start firing up if you were to scan someone who is experiencing either physical disgust or moral disgust. You know the feminist content creator Michael Rowlands?
No, not offhand, but I don't know any names of anything.
Okay. He was one of the people in the 26 passive-aggressive gotcha videos.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right.
The guy who looked like he was doing it from the back of a gay sauna. That guy.
I know the sauna.
Okay.
There
you know
go.
the sauna. Okay.
That is a whole other story for a whole other video, I feel. But yeah, he recently did a video on his channel where he was talking about how he believes that like biological sex is a spectrum, something which is patently false. You know, if you know anything about cell division, non-disjunction of gamete cells, and how all of this works, you know that biological sex is absolutely supposed to fall into a binary, but there are errors along the way as cells split. And in this video, he just constantly was banging on, I'm so empathic that I understand that there are people who don't fall into this one or the other. I'm so empathic. It was all this virtue thing about how empathetic he was for this. But then, when it came to people who say, well, no, there are only two biological sexes, the first thing that he said was bigot. So I can't believe that there are people so bigoted that they would have that point of view. And then that totally subverts his own previous assertion of empathy. You know, a truly empathic person would understand why someone would come to that conclusion. I mean, you could still disagree with them, maybe explain why you think you're wrong, but to instantly label them as a bigot for thinking differently from you underlies the true position. And the true position is you're not empathic, you're disgusted by the idea that someone would disagree with you. It's the complete opposite of empathy. And what's interesting about that is then that it's a selected form of empathy, which is governed by the disgust that you have for your outgroup. And hey, I remembered to get back onto the smug people. That is an in-group, outgroup dynamic. And it's tied to the sense of morality. As we've said, disgust can be both physical and moral. And we know this because of brain scans. I do have a section somewhere on that, which I can dig up and read. But that is an in-group, out-group dynamic thing that you're seeing. So when someone is disgusted with the out-group, they are necessarily setting themselves up because, you know, I'm me, I'm on the in-group, I'm the good one, I'm the one doing it right. So anything that chastises an out-group, anything that reminds you that you are morally superior to them, and again that does sort of tie into disgust at that point, they're beneath you, they are disgusting, so you reminding yourself of that, that's going to give you an ego boost, that's going to give you the rise, that's like, oh, I'm so much fucking better than you. And that is then where that sense of smugness comes from. It's reminding yourself that you're better. It's basically just egotistical masturbation, because you've reminded yourself that you are higher up on the moral hierarchy than the filthy peasants who think different from you.
I know personally, I feel a lot of anger towards social justice warriors and feminists. But there is a distinction to be made between anger and contempt, or contemptuous anger, because anger, and there's someone who does research into these kinds of emotions and when you should be seriously concerned in a relationship. Anger is fine. When somebody is angry with you, they're still acknowledging that you are an equal. You don't get angry at your inferiors. You get angry at equals. And you get angry at equals when they fail to uphold some standard of like civil discourse or what you consider to be, social, civic, ethic responsibility. Anger is fine. Don't ever think that it's bad. When things become toxic is when you express contempt, and that is a sense of superiority over the people that you are criticizing, and that's contemptuous anger. And it's characterized by sort of an asymmetrical expression, and that kind of smug look that we were talking about, that Teal'c was describing.
One thing which I do want to dial back to was when you were talking about facial expressions, because there's a lot of interesting things going on in people's faces when they feel disgust. As I said, first of all, the expression is universal, but what's interesting is that there is actually an event called facial feedback in the display of disgust, and what that is that if you make an expression of disgust when you feel it, it actually increases the acuteness of the feeling, which is why it's quite interesting that, you know, you get those old school adages of like, you know, school your face, you know, learn to not show that you're being bothered by something, and eventually it doesn't. It's true, because there is actually a mechanism that you can find in people whereby if they express how much something's annoying them, it actually annoys them more. So that's sort of something that's quite interesting there. But another thing very interesting about disgust is that it's actually it's subject to neuron mirroring. So other people showing disgust at something can trigger your own sense of disgust. And this is why I think you might see this spreading so much amongst the social justice people, and why they're able to sort of rile each other up and really end up hating certain groups and certain targets, which rationally you might disagree with them, but there's no reason for you to hate them. But because that sense of disgust can be triggered in other people, this is where you sort of see this happening. And it's actually quite interesting. There have been studies done actually on children, focusing on child development. When you take a child and put it in a room with its parent, you give the parent two toys to play with. If the parent makes a look of disgust at one toy, but then like smiles at another one, and then you leave the child with both of them, the child will prefer the one that the parent was smiling at, as opposed to the one that it was disgusted by. Which ties into what you were saying earlier about how you can learn this. You don't actually even have to have a negative social ramification for this. This is a behavioral pattern that you can reinforce in children simply by facial expression. So just by you showing a face of disgust at something, you can make people feel disgust for that thing, even if they don't know what it is. Or it could be something that they even enjoy, but it can still get that feeling going in people. And it's just very
That's
interesting that it's tied very closely, actually, between parents and children as well.
That's actually really interesting, because I think it actually strengthens what I'm talking about. The idea that disgust itself is a learning mechanism.
It is, absolutely. It is a way of teaching people, you don't deal with this because it's bad. But then
Yeah.
this is the problem, which again you've highlighted, not to take us round in circles, but it's the inevitable part of it. Eventually, something has been deemed disgusting for so long, you forget why. And then that's when the problems start happening. Would it interest you to know that disgust is so acutely wired in people's brains in such different ways that with a single shot test, that is, administering a test with one question, you can predict with 95% accuracy where someone falls on the political spectrum?
Really?
Yes.
Okay. What's
Basically, because the insular cortex is a big part of your brain. It's proportionally quite small, but big enough to have its own separate regions. Obviously, they're interior, the posterior, superior, so on and so forth. Pretty obviously, as you would expect it to be labeled. And the pattern that lights up when you show people of right wing, left wing, authoritarian, libertarian, when you show them any particular stimulus. Now, you can usually you'll do this in the form of an image. Different areas of the cortex will light up. And as I said, it's so accurate and so stark, the patterns that this firing takes, that you can predict within a 95% accuracy of whether they're going to be left-wing, right-wing, libertarian, authoritarian, or something like that. And this is actually really interesting to me as well, because we know from taking MRI scans of people that actually quite a large part of your political alignment is basically determined by your brain structure. And this, I think, is then part of it. People on the right wing, people who tend to fall into the conservative thing, tend to have better emotional control as a result of that. While they may feel more emotions, they're also better at managing them, which is why I always point out to those people, it's like, do you wonder why the conservative stereotype is, button down collar, bolt upright, oh, no, I'm going to take this all with a stiff upper lip, and no, don't show anything. That's why. It's because that center of your brain gives you superior emotional control. So that tends to be why, people on the lefty side, the liberal side, the progressive side especially, when they get upset by something, they fucking riot. They shout, they scream, they have a temper tantrum like a fucking 2-year-old. Whereas when people on the right get upset by something, they tend to go, well, shit. That's about it.
Another thing is that does the study account for, like, does it do it by age? Because the age of people's political views tend to change as they get older. And that was something else.
Yeah. One thing which I would be aware of with that is that because their viewpoint is changing, or is it because the society is
I
changing?
think it's a bit of both of those things. I think
Yeah.
that what usually happens is society ever more moves towards liberalism slowly. Young liberals are often really impatient and they want to get to where they think utopia is a lot faster. But as they get older, they come to the realization that maybe some of the things they were really proponents of are, anywhere between less than reasonable to just completely ridiculous, like identifying as ketchup or something. And that they also see that the world is moving ever steadily towards, this more sort of, it becomes more and more liberal as time moves on. It just does so very slowly.
People who were on the right wing were more likely to come up with a fair result on something because they were better at judging things impartially, whereas liberal people would more likely show in-group, out-group bias. So in a study which was done, and I think this was the one example they came up with, which was to do with a president and military general, the Republicans were just as likely to say that a Republican president, Republican general, when they fucked up, they were more likely to say they fucked up, like call them on their bullshit, basically, whereas the lefty liberal side was more likely to say, oh, no, it's fine. They were more likely to excuse it in their own side, but be harsher on the other side in the same condition. So people on the right were more likely to be able to play fair, basically, across in-groups or out-groups. So that might go some way towards explaining that people on this left progressive side are more likely to have a more fierce in-group, out-group conflict than people on the right, who are more likely to sort of look at actually what's happening and play fair by what they're seeing. You know how on Honey Badger Radio we've talked about how things like religion are generally propagated more by women than by men?
Yes.
Yes. Disgust is gendered. Women are more likely to experience disgust than men, and more acutely. And that's something which has again actually been demonstrated in studies. A study from done using fMRIs on people's brains and exposing them to images of people, and they are people from stigmatized groups, so drug users, homeless people, and whatnot like that. And in all people that they were shown it, they had a reaction of disgust, and it was the distinct chemical reaction again in the brain that's very, very obvious. You can see it on an MRI. So people will dismiss it and simply not care about it as much.
We hope you enjoyed this clip show. If there was a clip from these shows you think we should have shown, please leave a comment with a timestamp. And thank you, Badger On, and, well, See you next time.